Started a meeting because of the voting in the House.
Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 34 du comité permanent des ressources humaines, du développement des compétences, du développement social et de la condition des personnes handicapées. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule en format hybride, conformément à la décision de la Chambre du 23 juin.
That are attending in person and remotely using the Zoom application. In order to ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to take a few moments for the benefits of the witness and members to make a few comments. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. For those participating virtually, please use the raise hand function. Before speaking, click on the microphone icon to activate your own mic. When you're done speaking, please put your mic on mute. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available for the meeting. For those participating by video conference, you have the choice of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use an earpiece and select a desired channel. And I would again advise committee members as well as witnesses to speak slowly for the benefit of the Is there a problem, Mr. Rilla? For the interpretation services, I would also like to remind participants that screenshots are not permitted. Should any difficulties arise during the meeting, please advise me and we'll suspend while we're corrected. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February the 3rd, the committee will commence its study of supporting Black Canadian communities initiatives. The connectivity tests have been completed on all the witnesses, and we are ready to go. I would like to welcome our witnesses. To begin our discussion, I would remind the witnesses that you have 5 minutes each for your opening remarks, followed by questions from the committee members. From the Canadian Congress on Inclusive Diversity and Workplace Equity, Madame Ayama. And from the NIA Center for the Arts, Alicia Hall, Executive Director. We will start, who did we have ready to start? Monsieur Ayama, with 5 minutes, please. If you're ready to begin, you have the floor.
Okay. Can you all hear me? Just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this very, very critical conversation. Certainly, I appreciate the opportunity and want to give a shout out to Michael Kuto, I think he's there somewhere, for the work you're doing in the Black community to help with Black businesses and develop the community. When we talk about supporting the Black community, especially Black businesses, we see that the government and other corporations are doing a lot with, allocating funds to help people to either start or keep the business going and things like that through organizations like the Black Business and Professional Organization, which I used to be on the board. But I think an area that is overlooked for many times is the impact of racism on Black businesses. The impact, and I will talk about perhaps 3 quick points in my 5 minutes. I have a friend who invited me to Canada almost 30 years ago. He's passed away now, George. And he was so successful in his businesses. He had a lot of Zellers pharmacy. Then they used to have Zellers. And his complaint then was some white people would come in and they say, we want to see the pharmacist. And the moment they produce him, they insult him and leave. Some would say, you're a pharmacist? Do they have pharmacy in Africa? And he would always come to me and I would always encourage him. But it wasn't one, it wasn't two. He had 3 pharmacies and that was consistently happening. And he had them in white-dominated area, which literally was killing his businesses. My first job here was in the call center. And, as I often say, I love this so much. And people will call, and at Bank of Montreal, MasterCard, let's speaking, bonjour, comment je peux vous aider? They say, quoi, c'est bordel? What accent do you have? And if that was my business, I'll be losing 80% of my calls because of my accent. So yes, it's one thing to say, here's $1 million, here's $2 million. But there is an aspect of education that is continuously overlooked. we're doing a lot. We speak, we train, but until this becomes part of the educational curriculum, whereby we are seeing less and less of racism, we can keep pouring money into the business. If nobody's coming, the business is going to close down. We can keep pouring money into the business. If the people in the community, and there's no plans to educate them through the educational curriculum. I mean, we've all heard about limiting or restricting, rather, Black education to February. It is good we have the February as Black History Month, but it is bad that it's limited to Black History Month. And that continuously impact. I know this because I have a business and I know many Black people with businesses. I also talk about credit, right? Some of you may not know this, but credit, the banks, their systems will decline credit to credit-worthy people because of their postal code. I've tested it. I'm a victim of that. If I use a postal code in Royal York, I'll get a line of credit of 25K. But if I use a postal code in Jenna Finch or in Kipling, I won't even get $500. I tried it. It's not what they told me. And I have friends who go through that. So the point is there, when we talk systemic racism, we don't see it. Most people don't see it, but those who feel it, they experience it, and it continues to hamper their businesses. So what are some of the things I feel perhaps the government needs to look more into rather than saying, yes, $20 million or yes, $1 billion? Well, what are we doing? What can be done more to increase the awareness of anti-Black racism through the educational curriculum, through the systems? Most of these systems used in the bank and in the insurance company, they were built by people with colonial mindset. So the people using them may no longer be racist, but the system was built years ago and they still are. So there are so many systemic barriers beyond what we see and read on the paper to what we're feeling. And the last one I'll quickly add with my remaining 90 seconds, I think. I run the Canadian Congress. I've been talking and training on diversity since 1998. I've educated Bank of Montreal, Royal Bank, and all these big banks and done training. We train 10,000 people every year through our organization. But since the death of George Floyd, some analysis have been done, and 80% of the work for diversity were given to white-led organizations. I didn't say that. There are researchers to prove that. So even the banks, I know the CIBC is one, many of them, right? So perhaps the government needs to look at way of some policy or some way to ensure that even the training of Black, Ministry of Ontario, a friend of mine works, they said the person that trained them on Black, anti-Black was an Indian woman. Of course, I'm sure she's smart, but she's not Black. It is fundamentally flawed to hire somebody without a lived experience to speak on the experience of other people. But those things are happening, and you'll never know about it. We do. So if any seconds is left, I give that back to the House.
Mr. Ihema, we will now move to Madame Hall for your opening 5-minute statement. Madame Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the committee for making time for this important discussion. My name is Alika, and I'm the Executive Director at NIA Center for the Arts. We're a Black-led and Black-serving charitable organization based in Toronto. We support young people through career development, mentorship, and employment in the arts. We also support emerging artists to perform and showcase their work so they can build viable careers and tell the stories of our community right across the country. After over a decade of supporting the creative capacity of our community, we're taking on this transformational project to renovate our 14,000 square foot facility into Canada's first professional Black Arts Centre. I give you this backdrop because we have received a couple of grants through the Supporting Black Canadian Communities Initiative in the past 2 years, which has really been helpful in supporting us to build our organizational capacity to prepare for this transformation, to being a smaller grassroots group into running a arts institution. And so we've received support to do things like build out our digital infrastructure, such as Wi-Fi planning, ensuring we have a safe and secure building that we can process payments online. We receive support for HR planning to ensure that we have the right staffing model at the right times in order to run the facility, and of course, fundraising. Before the pandemic, we had just one monthly donor. Now we have over 150. So we've been able to work with a consultant to build out our stewardship plans and recognition to support those who are contributing to the organization. Why is this kind of support needed? Because research shows just last year, the Foundation for Black Communities, in partnership with Carleton University, did a research study and found that only 7 cents of every charitable dollar in Canada goes to a Black-led and Black-governed organization. So we know there's a significant gap. The philanthropic sector is huge. Canadians are sitting on a wealth of money, billions of dollars, and yet that money is not trickling down to our community. So government resources are really key to help us to do things like build our organizational capacity, deliver services, because we're not getting the same kind of support from corporations or the philanthropic sector major donors. I just went through a $10 million capital campaign, and I can assure you of that. The other consideration is that at the municipal level and the provincial level, we know that the existing funding programs are quite focused on service delivery and staffing that directly support service delivery. So core roles, core staffing roles, I've had an operations manager just for the past year. She's been leading a lot of these strategic initiatives that help us to deliver our services more effectively and efficiently and prepare, as I mentioned, for the transformation that we're going through. But not many grassroots Black-led organizations have an operations manager. And so the challenge that we face is the existing funding landscape doesn't support the kind of keep the lights on resources that's needed to ensure that there's a charitable landscape that's supporting the Black community across the country that has the resources to do so. So as the federal government is looking to, address anti-Black racism, address the proliferation of hate in our communities, integrate immigrant communities across the country, there needs to be a strong network of charitable organizations that's supporting this work, particularly for the Black community. And you've planted a number of seeds through the SBCCI program so far, and we need to ensure that those seeds are able to grow and flourish, and these organizations are able to continue doing this important work. So I would suggest some of the two following suggestions in order to sort of build on the program as you look to implement the final couple of years of funding. And one is to steer away from this project-based funding, because a lot of smaller organizations don't have, sort of core funding support through their existing funding structures. Project support for 6 months to do this kind of work becomes really difficult because a number of staff are wearing multiple hats, right? They're doing service delivery, they're addressing, all these issues that have come up through the pandemic. We're seeing increased focus and requests, as my colleague has mentioned, for Black-led organizations. And so they don't have the staffing support to actually do this work. And the second thing I would mention is that there needs to be more support for core staffing and operational resources because of the gaps at the other two levels of government, as well as what I had mentioned around the need for that, particularly for Black-led organizations. So as you look at redesigning and restructuring the SBCCI program for the coming fiscal years, I think it's really important when we think about long-term support for Black-led organizations and more unrestricted funding. Thank you so much.
Hall, we will now begin the first round of questioning, and before we do the first round of 6 minutes, I will advise you when there's 10 seconds left to ensure that fairness to all the committee members, we get around to as many as possible. So we'll begin with Madame Kuzi with 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Monsieur le Président, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Madame Hall, you did an excellent job of articulating the benefit of the program for your organization as well as the shortfalls. So thank you very much for that. So with that, I'll go to Monsieur HUMA. I was wondering if Monsieur HUMA, if you or anyone you know has applied for the Supporting Black Community Initiative Fund, and if perhaps you could talk about, have you yourself or do you know anyone within your community who has applied for this fund?
No, we have not applied, but we know people who, I don't know if they applied, but they were discussed about it. They were thinking of applying, but I can't confirm whether they did or not.
Okay. stated in your opening comments many of the barriers that your community faces, but I'd like you please to expand upon that. What would you say is the most significant holdback or barrier to Black-led organizations applying for federal funding in general, if you had to name one particular thing?
Yes, what I find, which I know many organizations like BBPA and some others are working on, is the enabling environment, right? So there's an area called Eglinton. I think some may or may not know it. I know a lot of business owners in that particular area, and I drive there every now and then, especially when I go to the Jamaican consulate that's there. The environment itself is not enabling the businesses to thrive. So like I just mentioned, a friend who had 3 Zellas, then he's passed on now, and I still have friends who have. And they make so much effort in this. And yes, there may be a funding to support, but the community themselves, if they are not coming to patronize your business, then it's not going to go anywhere, really, no matter how much funding you have. So if we want to put that into an action item or a topic or a term, is the enabling environment. Is wanting to have the funding, is wanting to have the confidence, is wanting to have all the support. But again, if somebody's not knocking on your business, then the business is somehow going to struggle and eventually close. And we know businesses like that. We're doing a lot on our end, but we want to see the government, yes, the funding is there. The money itself doesn't enable the environment. You can give me $1 million today. If the people in my area in Mississauga don't patronize me because they don't have the awareness of I'm not dangerous or whatever they're struggling with, then that business will shut down. I've seen many businesses shut down. I used to live in Martin, shut down. I used to live in other areas, shut down. Like I said, I applied for credit, the same credit worthiness. And I have a friend in TD Bank who says, use an address in Royal York and watch it. And I did, and I got it. Same credit, it just with a different address. So we tested it, it was a test. So the enabling environment, the systems, the policies, these things were built way back, and nobody's ever talked about the actual, when I say system, I'm talking the technology used to. I worked in a bank. I worked in Royal Bank, CIBC, and BMO. I know them. I know that those systems are still in there. So enabling environment. I don't know if that answered your question.
Expanding upon this enabling environment you're referring to then, what more do you think the federal government should be doing to support entrepreneurship, in Black Canadian communities, would you say?
Thank you very much for that question. Number one is education. Limiting or restricting rather education, Black education to February, it's an injustice, as Martin Luther King would say, injustice anywhere. Like that is education. Number one is education. The fact that for far too long we still keep it to February, I think that we should be ashamed of that. It's the same for the indigenous people. So that's number one. And then number two, we need to look at the systems and the policy, both in the judiciary, in the finance. Nobody's holding the bank. I know the bank. I know them well. I know some of the leaders that are there. Those systems, why would a system that applies credit give you a credit because you have a different postal ID? Same credit, same. We've tested it and we can test it again and again. So that's number two. Number one is education. We need to take that beyond workshops and conferences and take it into classrooms. We need to take that into classroom, and people have the option to take it to their homes or not, but at least in the classroom. And then number two, the organizations like the banks, the insurance companies, these organizations, they should be held accountable some way, shape or form to ensure that the systemic barriers they have. It's one thing for CIBC to say, we just donated $10 million to the Black community, yet if a Black immigrant applies for credit card, he gets nothing. And if he goes to his cousin's house to apply to his address, he gets it. So that's still going on. So there are deeper issues in those. And then, of course, we look at the policies of protecting Black businesses. We all know that one with regards to the law and justice. So, I mean, I could go on, but the education is number one. We are here today because of miseducation. Let's be very clear. There are still books on Amazon that say Blacks are from the ape. You can still buy it. There are books that say indigenous are savages. right? So there are still university professors that still hold those views. So we are here because 11 generations were miseducated. We don't expect one generation to be educated to catch up, but what we do expect is there's a plan to educate the next 11 generations so that at some point in time, hopefully it's not 11, maybe 2, 3 generations, we can truly live in peace, as Martin Luther King said. Well, my little black boys and little white girls, they'll have no issues playing together, and their parents would have no issues either.
Hi, HUMA. That concludes the
Yes.
time. Now, Mr. Coteau.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to start by saying thank you to our witnesses for being here today. We're here as a committee to look at this initiative, to find out what's working, where we can make improvements, and to tap into your expertise. And I just want to say thank you to the both of you for the work you're doing to advance, many issues that relate back to the Black community and the general public as a whole. I'd like to just talk about NIA, the organization that Ms. Hall represents. And I just want to take a minute to share some information with this committee. That organization started, I believe it was almost 15 years ago. I know the Youth Challenge Fund in Ontario that was set up by Dalton McGuinty and Pinball Clements in 2006 was an allocated amount of money that worked with 33 Black-led organizations 15 years ago plus. And of those organizations, I believe only 3 exist today. And NIA Center is one of those organizations in Toronto, and it's one of the few, if not only, Black spaces for the arts in the entire province, if not the country. One of the things that came out of the Youth Challenge Fund was the fact that if organizations don't have the ability to build capacity, if organizations don't have resources to build better governance, to put in place better board structures, the basic backbones that are required for organizations to do well, they often do fail. So I just wanted to acknowledge the work that the NIA Center has done to actually survive over the last 15, 16 years by going in all different directions, provincial, municipal, working with partners, bank, anyone they can find to survive. And they're here now providing us with advice to build public policy. To me, that is capacity building, and that's the intention of what this initiative is here to do. One of them is to contribute, to build capacity, contribute to better public policy building. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing and the work you continue to do. So, Ms. Hall, I have a question to ask you. Why is it important to have Black-led organizations participate in the decision-making on how funding flows to organizations that service and provide support to Black communities, from your perspective?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Coteau, for the kind words and the question. Having Black-led organizations, I think, we've just more recently landed on this language of B3 organizations. So Black-led, Black-governed, and Black-serving is an important way to categorize the organizations that I consider to be sort of our peers in this network. My other colleague here, Alex, also mentioned an important point that there has been previous rounds of funding that have been allocated or designated for anti-racism initiatives or initiatives that are focused on supporting Black communities, but those funds haven't actually gone to Black-led organizations. I get many calls, over the years from other organizations saying, hey, there's a grant due tomorrow. Do you want to partner on it? So that really what they mean is they can write an application where they receive funds, but we're listed as a partner. And so they then, leverage our work, our name, in order to put forward an application that goes forward for adjudication amongst, if it's federal, employees who aren't as familiar with our communities, aren't as familiar with the organizations that are actually doing the work on the ground, that have the connections to community, that understand the issues that our communities are facing and are doing this work. And so what happens is, those well-meaning employees or, committee members look at the grants and look at organizations that they're familiar with, which oftentimes can be national organizations organizations that have been around for a very long time, but don't actually serve our community or have connections to our community. And so that's why it's really important that there are Black Canadians on the committee processes or the adjudication processes to review these grants, because they're more likely to be A, familiar with the organizations who are doing this work, B, able to scrutinize, the ways in which organizations are proposing that they design programs, that they conduct outreach, that they assess their impact in ways that are reflective of our capacity, our community's capacity and needs. So it's really important that the community is part of this process. As Mr. Couteau mentioned, the Youth Challenge Fund was a really strong example of a Black-led funding body actually allocating resources, which really led to a funding approach that was collaborative, that was focused on, at the time, was focused on young people, and that was focused on systemic change. I actually was lucky to be one of the staff. I was a young intern at the Youth Challenge Fund, some 15 years ago. And so I feel really honored to have started my career at that organization, seen how it best functions, and now be realizing this important project for our country. But yes, just
can I jump in for 1 second? I just wanted to make the comment that, people may ask on the committee, or even just Canadians in general, why not just have Black-led organizations apply to the larger pool of funding sources or foundations? And I want to go back to the point that you make, because I think it's a really good point, that 7 cents for every $100 that's contributed to Black serving organizations in this country, it's only 7 cents on the $100. There's just not a really good balance there. So building the capacity and the ability for organizations to apply and to build themselves so they can compete in that space is also important by carving out this type of initiative and other initiatives that are similar. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
That in a future answer to Mr. Couteau. We're out of time, and I would welcome you to do that. We'll now go to Madame Chabot pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, Chair. Good evening to both of you, to both witnesses. Thank you very much for being here. I will speak slowly. You'll be listening to the interpreter. I myself am a unilingual francophone. I have a question that's addressed to both of you, so you may answer in the order that you prefer. My first question, in your opinion, this initiative to support Canada's Black communities, the SBCCI, which is in its third year, since it was in the 2019 budget. So my first question is it known sufficiently in the year so that it can be used as much as possible by the organizations in questions? And you talked about the need to raise awareness, so issues of inclusion and inclusiveness. But this program is supposed to, according to ESDC, Employment and Social Development Canada, it's an initiative that is supposed to help promote the social inclusion of the Black and racialized communities. So 2 questions. First of all, is this program well enough known in the communities in questions? And is the program meeting these goals, the goal of promoting the inclusion of Black and racialized communities? Thank you.
Is this program well known in the community? And number 2, is it promoting the equity, or rather achieving the objective? Number 1, we have a very large base. I can say it's not to as much as it could. There's so much of this going on. People forward email, oh, did you know of this? As Alicia just mentioned, did you know of this? Can we partner together on this? There's so much of it. So some of the perception people have come up with is they just keep throwing money at us. I feel as if that's what we need right now. We need some respect. We need some acknowledgement. We need some empowerment. We need some inclusion. We need some equity. There's so many things that we need beyond that. I had the opportunity to interview Senator Mary Jane McCallum yesterday for our Indigenous event happening tomorrow, the Indigenous Senator. And I asked her one question. I said, Senator, what is wealth to you? W-E-A-L-T-H. She paused and said, wealth to me is your voice. Not money, is your voice. Do we have a voice? Do we have a voice? If we had a voice, it won't be only 7 cents coming to our community. You can give us $1 million. If we don't have a voice, then it's not doing justice. Like I said, it's good. It's well intended, so we do appreciate it. But we still don't have a voice. We appreciate being here today, but in the grand scheme of things, we don't. So that's part one. I think my own colleague will have some to add to that. The part two of the question, I think is already embedded in the response to part one, is no, because frankly, the government cannot do it alone. Let's be clear. The government need to engage the corporation. The government need to engage the community. The government need to engage the schools. The government need to engage the system. You can't do it alone. You can put $100 billion to this. It will not end systemic racism, and that's a fact, right? So while it's being done, we appreciate it, and that goes for the Indigenous community. We are very involved in that community as well. So we need to, I amplify. If we just look at even the beautiful picture I'm looking at into this house, the representation is imbalanced in itself. So that's my take. Thank you so much for that question. Please, my colleague, if you have something to add, you may go ahead.
Oui, bien sûr. Merci, Madame, pour la question.
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question, and I will also speak more slowly.
Between perhaps the business side of things and the charitable side. So the SBCCI for the charitable section was administered to two Black-led organizations, I think maybe three, one in Ontario, one out west, and one in Nova Scotia, I believe. And I know that they had record applications to some of the streams. So I think there was some greater awareness in terms of some grassroots outreach to charitable organizations to solicit applications from them. But I know that there is a difference between, charitable organizations have received grants and been applying for grants for many years, and we're sort of more familiar with that system, whereas I think, Black businesses haven't received support for decades. So I could see, sort of Alex speaking a bit more to that trend of businesses not being in the know. I, for one, oftentimes see grant applications for businesses and forward them to my entrepreneur friends, but they're just not looking out for grants in the same way. So I think that is one of the challenges. To your second question around, is this program meeting the goal of social inclusion? I would say that the funding over the past few years of the funding has focused on capacity building. So I'm receiving funds to develop a digital infrastructure plan or, a fundraising plan. That work, over time will enable me to better serve the community and to create a space where Black Canadians feel they're represented, they feel a sense of belonging, they're seeing artwork that reflects their stories and their narratives. Young people can connect with mentors, but the fund itself is not actually supporting that direct work. It's supporting the organization. So I would say, no, that goal hasn't been achieved. And there's an opportunity for this committee to refine the program and revise the program so that it can provide direct support to Black-led organizations to do that work, to create safe spaces, to connect them to, the social capital that is necessary for them to move ahead in their careers, to offer them employment opportunities through the network of charities that have been supported through the federal government, through the SBCCI program. So I'd say that goal hasn't been reached, but it is within reach.
So now to Madame Zerillo for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really want to get some more information there from Ms. Hall, just to continue on that topic she was speaking to on building capacity and the opportunity for long-term planning. Ms. Hall, you mentioned about some of the changes that can be made or, think about it not being project-based funding and to have unrestricted funding. But I just wanted to dig in deeper. How now are you able to do this long-term planning or capacity building with these short-term grants that aren't even necessarily funding operational needs?
Yeah, I've been really dependent on other folks coming forward to support and fill these gaps. So for example, I mentioned I do have an operations manager now, which has been really critical to doing things like preparing to manage the facility and leading strategic initiatives and allowing me the time to free my time up to do advocacy and fundraising. But the only reason I have an operations manager is because United Way Toronto, made a proposal to them and articulated the need for why I need an operations person for the next 2 years to get us, into the building and ensure that the building is realized. And as one of the, original supporters of the Youth Challenge Fund and the NIA Center, they gave us the money for 2 years for an operations manager. But otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do it because the municipal funding that I receive, the federal funding that I receive, the provincial funding that I receive, we receive quite a bit of funding, but all of it has a restriction on how much money can go to operations. So only 20%. I'm just signing, a grant agreement now for $400,000 over 2 years, but only 20% of it can go towards the kind of staffing that allows me to do my job and allows an operation manager to ensure that there's a facility for these young people to come into and artists to be able to work in. So it means that we have to juggle all of these programs and all of these funders in order to get the resources we need for core staffing and organizational operations. And I've, spoken to officials at Canadian Heritage to say the same thing, is like, we're receiving support to do, important work. We're working on a research project, for example, right now to look at the experiences of anti-Black racism and hate online. But I receive only 7% of that funding agreement is going towards operations. I'm leading the project. 7% there's more than 7% of my time being invested in the project, but yet the federal government has capped the funding to support my efforts. And so it's a structural problem that really hinders organizations to do the long-term work, to not simply be chasing a number of project funds, and really focus our time on service delivery and being able to serve our community. So thank you for that question.
If I have a little bit more time, I just wanted to go to Mr. What do I have?
3.5.
HUMA.
Okay. Mr. Iham, I just want to ask you, I mean, you addressed it head on, the systemic racism that's happening in, you spoke specifically about banks today. I mean, these are federally regulated workplaces. So my question is around, what kind of work the government can do in federally regulated workplaces to ensure that there is education that you speak of. I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, but is there any examples you could share with this committee of any of the banks or any of the other federally regulated workplaces that are actually doing this work that you've seen? And do you have any thoughts around more federal oversight on making sure that there's education happening?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. Only 6 weeks ago, I was told about a woman who came from India. A young woman, they train you for 6 weeks and they put you in the call center because it's the lowest paying job in the bank, which was my first job. I loved it. This woman, her first call happened to be a white Canadian who, the moment heard her accent, picked on her and insulted her heritage. Your husband must be a terrorist. I listened to it. Said, sorry, sir, my husband is not. You're a Taliban. No, I'm not. And the bank will tell you that the customer is always right. They've been telling us that since 1998. I did not know about mental health issues then, but I used to see my peers crying in the washroom. And to understand it's still going on, shame on that industry completely. The employees are not protected. I can bring them here for you to listen to. They come to us, they complain. I heard about that Indian woman. I was very concerned that happened to me in 98. It's still happening. That was Royal Bank. My suggestion to them, I said, debank them. Just the way you take somebody with no credit out of your bank. If your clients mentally abuse, racialize your employees, protect them. The employees are not protected by the banks. I know the banks I know because I know them. I'm sure it's in the same in other areas, but those are federally regulated places. What do they have to protect them? Number two, the systems they use. I know the system. I worked on one of the biggest system project in CIBC that moved 900 jobs to India, 900 jobs. And that's fine. They want to make all the money, but those systems, I know them. I can call names of those systems. They know I know. I talk to them. Like with that system, I can test it. I apply for credit card, the same credit. I put my old address in Martin, and I apply for it. I put my new address in Shelburne. Different credits you have access to based on your area code. That is fundamentally wrong, completely wrong, and nobody's talking about it. That's not two. Number three as well. So protect your employees, ensure that there's equity in the assignment or the giving of credit. Simple thing like lending, they need to do that. So I know this is, we have limited time, but those are two big ones. To have parents crying in the washroom 98, and they are still crying today because they accepted a job of $17. People who have degrees back home, and the bank is saying the customer is always right. They need to start removing those clients from their books, the clients that are mentally insulting and abusing their employees.
Emma, your time is concluded. Madame Zarella, we'll go to the second round with Madame Gladue for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank the witnesses for your frank testimony. This is exactly what we need to hear, is the reality of the situation and what the federal government can do about it. So I want to follow up on my colleague Michael Coteau's question. Why doesn't it work to have Black-led organizations apply to the general funding? And I'd like to hear from both of you what you think. Start with Mr. HUMA.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I can.
No, let her go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, the question just blew out of my head, actually.
I'm talking about why it doesn't work for Black-led organizations to apply to the general funding pool.
Yes. So, I mean, we have to recall first and foremost that, Black-led organizations are a smaller contingent of charitable organizations, mostly because we've been underfunded and under-resourced over the years. And so when programs open up, particularly at the federal level, given that there are, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of charities across the country, oftentimes larger charities who have more resources, a dedicated fundraising department, a dedicated development department, years of applications, potentially as well as successful applications with the federal government, end up getting funded. Right? They're familiar, they're already in the system. Oftentimes review committees are familiar with their work and what they do and are like, yeah, they can deliver on this. So we've definitely had scenarios where we've applied to programs that are focused on supporting racialized youth to access recreation programs, to access employment, to create a sense of safety and belonging. We apply, we put together an application, we often work, with other folks who have been successful, and yet we're declined. And when we follow up and we ask for feedback, we hear it's a very competitive process. We receive thousands of applications. You're up against everybody, right? And so for organizations that are newer, that are more grassroots, that are doing important and innovative work, but haven't been around as long or not as familiar, I was in a meeting just last week with a bank representative, and they were like, I fund arts organizations across the country. I've never heard of you. How come I don't know you? And they were excited to support our work, but were surprised that they didn't know of us. Why? Because we don't support the general community per se. We're very targeted in supporting Black youth, and supporting Black artists, and have spent most of our time in cultivating those relationships and offering those supports. So the general mainstream, whether it's corporations or the government, is not as familiar with us. And that's a detriment for us in being competitive and being assessed equitably, not competitively. We need equity in these scenarios. And so by carving out a separate fund for Black-led organizations, you're able to assess apples to apples. How can I go up against the National Ballet? Right? Everyone knows the National Ballet. Everyone's excited to bring their clients to the National Ballet, but there will be no, amazing Black ballet dancer that I can present if I'm not supported to cultivate that talent. So that's why a separate funding system is needed, or a funding pot is needed for Black-led organizations, so we can assess their applications with other organizations that are comparative, that are similar. And we're also ensuring that we're prioritizing the equity approach, right? Not all organizations need the same thing, and not all Black-led organizations are at the same place as, national and larger, more mainstream organizations. So that separation in funding is really key to ensuring that we're being equitable in our approach and distribution of the funding.
HUMA.
Yes. Yes, thank you. I think she's done justice to the question. But if I have to add anything or amplify anything, rather, we need to understand that we can't compare apple to oranges, so to speak. The injustices the Black community and Black businesses have faced over time, we can't put the money on the table and say, but why are they not growing? The money is on the table. Well, look at the 11 generations. It was Martin Luther King who once said that, they want us to lift ourselves with the bootstrap. But Martin Luther King said, well, what if you don't have a boot? What are you going to lift yourself with, right? So we need to move from the equality to the equity. We need to begin to dismantle and look at those systems. Like I said, the government can't do this alone. You need to call those people to the table and say, we're about to give them 10 million. How are you going to help? What do you need to change to support this work? And until everybody's on the table, nobody's on the table. So why are they not? Well, because for far too long, they've been held down. For far too long, they've been restricted. For far too long, they've been limited. For far too long, and not just for far too long, even now, it is still going on. It is tiring to be Black in Canada, exhausting to run a business as a Black person in Canada. I just told you, we train on diversity on Black, we train, but they hire the white. We apply, we do proposal, and we read later on their website, they just hired a company that's led by a white person to come and do anti-Black systemic racism in that organization. Come on.
No, I get you.
This is reality.
Yeah, the bias is well documented.
Very good.
Thank you. Then Mr. Van Bynen for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the benefit of having 3 Black-led organizations in my community. The NACA organization, which is the Newmarket Aurora Caribbean Canadian Association, ABC, which is the Aurora Black Community Council, and the Aurora Black Community Caucus. And I've had a number of conversations with them. And I understand, and I hear exactly what we're hearing here as well. And so I think we've heard enough in terms of what the drawbacks of the system is, what the drawbacks of the systemic problems that you face. I'm interested in knowing, and I see that there were 4 organizations: Tropicana Community Services, the Black Business Initiative, and the Africa Fund, as well as Group 3737. So those are national high-level organizations. And what I'm hearing is that organizations like NACA or the ABC are not getting access because they're grassroots organizations. So there's a gap between the distributors or the decision makers and the people who need the funds because A, they're not resourced well enough, and they don't seem to be able to get through. So what recommendations would you have to deal with the gap between the broader distributing group and the people who are actually looking for but don't have resources to apply for the funding?
I think just a point of clarification. So you're saying that the 3 organizations that are in your riding also haven't been able to receive funds from the Black-led organizations that were tasked with distributing the funding. Is that correct?
And to start with, they're not familiar enough with the process. And so I'm trying to find out how can we make these organizations more familiar with that process.
Yeah, and I think part of one of the things that we saw was really successful with the Youth Challenge Fund model was that because it was a designated fund, all of the staff who worked at the fund, their entirety of their roles were focused on building relationships with grassroots organizations on the ground. So youth-led organizations, young people, whereas the intermediary organizations that we have now, like Tropicana isn't of itself a charity. Like, it runs programs in Scarborough for young people, safe spaces, after-school programs, etc. Because of this, SBCCI program, it's taken on the role of being a funder, but that is not its functional purpose or history, right? So the staffing model that they have isn't actually conducive to being a funder because they, for the past 30 years, have been a charitable organization. So I think, One of the other initiatives that the federal government I know is working on is an endowment, like setting up a Black foundation. And I would, really encourage the government to, accelerate and ensure that they're working on that. Because if you have an organization that is dedicated to distributing funding to these organizations, to building capacity, to supporting organizations over the long term, then you're going to have staff who can do that work on the ground, who can build relationships, who can go out and host focus groups, who can meet organizations in their communities. We did have one of the representatives from Africa Center come over here, and they're in Edmonton. So they came to Toronto to meet some of the organizations on the ground. But, they had to hire all new staff. It was a very quick process for them. They didn't really have the infrastructure to be able to do that necessary outreach to ensure that they're reaching, more rural communities, more emergent groups. So I think that ensuring that there's either an adequate staffing at the intermediary organization that's chosen so that they can do outreach. I know from working at the Youth Challenge Fund, we worked a lot of nights. We went out into communities late night. We were in Scarborough. We were in Jane and Finch. We were hanging out at the community center to let young people know that this grant was available to them, to socialize and think about what ideas would you want to bring to life? What did you want to see in your community? You need to be there on the ground, right? These are not communities that have strong relationships or ties to government. So we really need a staffing model and a funding model. And I think the preference, I would suggest is to have a Black community foundation that can be there for the long term and can actually focus on just building capacity and building relationships instead of trying to be a charity and a funder.
And I'll cede the rest of my time to Mr. Couteau.
How many do I have, Mr. Chair? How many?
Well,
if that's the case, I won't ask a question. I just want to say again, thank you so much to the both of you for being here and to sharing your expertise and your knowledge gained. We can't do this alone, and even looking for ways to find faults within the program to help build it, to discuss things like the return on investment and how the collaborative models work to improvement. Like, this is what we're here to do, and I just want to say thank you for contributing to a program which I think is working, which I think is great, but also is new and it's innovative, so it's going to continue to grow. So thank you so much for your contribution and for being here today.
Thank you to the chair and the committee for doing this important work.
Thank you.
Madame Chabot, pour 2,5.
Madame Chabot for 2.5 minutes. Thank you. 2.5 minutes means my question will follow up on the answer you gave, Ms. Hall, when it comes to the objectives of the program. You said that we certainly should improve the program, refine it. This program is supposed to meet certain needs, but in reading it, because I myself am not very familiar with it, and I realize that, but is the administrative burden too great? I'm asking because there was a report in the media that talked about concerns raised by Black-led organizations who learned that their applications were rejected because they did not meet the eligibility criteria. It's a report that I don't have time to get into, but is there enough flexibility? Is there enough knowledge and understanding of all the communities so that these sums of money, which aren't enormous, how could be allocated? So how could the program be improved and be refined? And if you don't have time to give a fulsome answer, you can provide a longer answer in writing to the committee. Thank you.
Jump in there. I think your response is in the question. Is there much flexibility? The answer itself is no. I think that's the word that we've been referring to in this place. So it's like a new immigrant who has 20 years experience in banking in Nigeria comes here, and a Canadian who just graduated from the University of Toronto 2 years ago. They both apply for a job. This one have 2 years experience, that one have 20. And automatically the one with two gets it because they say you don't have Canadian experience. He doesn't need that. What he needs is banking experience, not Canadian experience. He's applying for a job in the bank. He's not applying for a job to be a Canadian. So when we talk about equity, we have to look at it from every sphere. When you have money set aside, that application form, I can guarantee you, again, I've helped to build over 100 application forms for organizations. They take the same one that they've been using normally for the Canadian market, and they just make a few changes and point you to no, you have to recognize that we didn't have the same protection from credit or the same access to credit. You have to understand that we have been dealing with systemic barriers. So the application process of anything, whether you want a job for new immigrants, you want to apply for funding, you want to apply for credit, you want to apply. I was working in the bank and I didn't get a credit card until I went with my friend to Albion Mall to see a woman who worked in CIBC, and she did me a favor by giving me $500 because I'm new immigrant, right? So flexibility is critical to inclusivity. So when we are building this program, the people that don't bring people who've been building programs for the Canadian market to build it.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And I'd like Ms. Hall to be able to answer as well.
Madame.
Yes, thank you.
Madame,
I do think that
Madame
there is
Hall.
a tendency with Black-led organizations, even if the money is being allocated by another Black-led organization, to put a lot of reporting and administrative structures in place. So, for a $20,000 grant, I have a report that I have to fill out monthly, and we had to request to them, hey, we're not doing this work every month. We're working with a consultant. We don't have something to report on every single month. Can we report quarterly? So there is this, tendency to over-report, put in a lot of administrative barriers. And that's why I think the desire to ensure that the funding is really allocated to the needs of the organization and not just a funding system that is prescriptive. Application, you fill it out, then you're reporting, and every day until you basically end this 6-month project isn't really helpful for the organization in terms of actually learning and putting the efforts where it's most needed. So I agree that of course we have to account for how we're spending public dollars, but there is work to be done in terms of, I think, the trust with Black-led organizations and actually putting in administrative processes that make sense for the kind of work that's being undertaken.
Ms. Hall, we'll now conclude the
Thank you
first
for the
hour
question.
with Madame Zerrillo for your 2.5.
Exceeded some of my time because those answers were so important,
fine.
and I just
But
want to dig in.
But I'm going to give you your 2.5 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to dig in just a little bit on the Ms. Hall just was talking about applications, reporting, administered, and I just, if you could give us some thoughts on whether the application itself should be a little bit different. The reporting, you mentioned a little bit that the reporting it's a barrier at this point in time. And then right now the fund is administered through 4 different groups that I know of. Is that the way to go, or should we think about some changes there as well in relation to this grant fund?
I found the application to be streamlined and good in that sense, in terms of, it was focused on capacity building. There was a set kind of projects that we could apply for. So that process I found efficient. The reporting processes, as I mentioned, I think is still a bit too onerous and not necessarily useful in terms of getting the government and these organizations information that's necessary or that they can action on. And then the final area, was
how it's administered through 4 different groups.
Yeah, I don't think that the using intermediaries, okay. In this scenario, I'd say if you have to use an intermediary, then yes, having Black-led organizations that are regionally spread out is important to reaching groups on the ground. But I think the best case scenario to implement this project, and given the fact that the federal government has already initiated a process to establish an endowment for a Black foundation, I think a Black foundation should be leading this kind of work. Why? Because they'll have dedicated staff who are just focused on funding. B, if you get the right kind of sort of strategic and research-oriented foundation, they'll be able to do this work over the long term. They'll be able to do research to assess whether or not the funds are actually reaching the targeted demographic. They'll be able to build relationships. They'll be able to do ongoing outreach. So if people didn't get accepted into a round 1 of funding, they'll continue to do that outreach so that they would, potentially get funding in round 3 or round 4. And this is really all they're focused and tasked with doing. So they can be really invested in this work. I think that, Tropicana has done a great job given that they've, taken on this role, but it is a lot of work for a charitable organization to be both a funder and think, strategically and do outreach, and then also be, leading a regular day-to-day charity. So I would say that it's best for the government to focus on creating a Black community foundation. I think the Black Black Foundation of Canada has done a really great job so far in, developing research and starting to deliver grants, and that approach should be explored further.
Thank you so much.
Madame Zarrillo, and thank you to the two witnesses, Ms. Hall and Mr. Ihema. Obviously, your commitment and passion showed through in your testimony before the committee today, and I want to thank you. Thank you for appearing. With that, we'll conclude the first hour of the meeting, and then we have a few administrative items to deal with when the witnesses are excused. So again, on behalf of the committee, thank you for your contribution today.
Thank you so much for having us. God bless you. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Just
Merci à vous.
I would ask for the indulgence of the committee. As you know, we need to approve a budget for the study that we're currently doing. So I believe you have it. It's $9,300 to do this study. It has been circulated. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the budget? I see consensus, so the budget is adopted, Madam Clerk. I would just, before remind the committee members, this was a 1 hour. The committee approved 2 full sessions, so we'll need to schedule another hour. So looking at Monday, depending on the availability of witness, there will be 2 panels on this issue. Wednesday, the first hour will be on this study. As well, the last hour will be on drafting instructions for the report. I would just again remind members when you're submitting a witness list, if you could, the more information, contact information you can provide, the better, because then the clerk can reach them sometimes. So each one of you know personally some of these organizations, so if you have direct personal contacts, it makes it easier to line them up for the committee. Break week is, I don't like the way you wrote that, constituency week is October the 10th to the 14th, and then we'll start the disability study on October the 17th. I know, Madame Zarrillo, you were interested in that. So this is the schedule we'll be proceeding with. Clerk, you wanted to make a comment on Centennial Flame.
Yeah, just a quick comment on Centennial Flame. So as we discussed, well, the committee requested that we circulate all the old material from June to all the members. But in the meantime, the wonderful people in the House of Commons Communications and the graphic artists have been updating those documents. So revised documents, including the householder, sample social media posts, and the poster will be circulated to all the members so you can help us promote the 2022 Centennial Flame Award to all individuals in your ridings and outside. This material can be shared with other members, and we're just trying to help promote this to get the message out with the revised deadline of October 31st. So thank you for that.
Just I forgot when our first to introduce a new analyst who has joined the team, Matthew Blackshaw. My regrets. You too. With that, if there's no further business before the committee, I will call for a motion of adjournment. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.